Marvel's Avengers is one of those games that I was really excited for. The idea of an Avengers game just seemed like a very interesting idea, especially since we live in the midst of all the MCU hype. And I was very curious as to how they were going to approach this. Was it going to be an open world game, a simple linear campaign, a fighting game? I was dying to know what type of game it would be. And then Marvel's Avengers, developed by Crystal Dynamics and published by Square Enix, finally came out. And it's the very definition of mediocre. It does a couple of things right, but it has a long list of problems. One of the biggest issues with this game, in my opinion, is that it's in the wrong genre. When I pictured an Avengers game, I imagined it would be something like Marvel's Spider-Man, that it would be an open world game and you can roam around the city as the Avenger of your choosing and do different tasks and missions and things along those lines. But what we got is the opposite of that. Marvel's Avengers is a live service game. And the whole premise of the game is that you go into these missions that are all pretty much the same, you beat up endless hordes of enemies, and you get loot to level up your character. That's all this game is. Other than that, it doesn't have much to offer. There is a campaign, and there is a story, but I personally found the story to be very generic and quite boring. There isn't much for you to latch onto. You play as Miss Marvel, or Kamala Khan, and she is by far the best part about the story. As a matter of fact, she's pretty much the only good part about this story. She's charming and she does her best to sort of represent the audience and to try to make you feel what it would be like to meet the Avengers for the first time and to work alongside them. But most of the writing for all the other characters is just not good. And you can tell that it's the writing that's the issue because as far as voice actors go, they went all out and got the absolute best in the business to do the job. They got Nolan North as Iron Man, and of course it's Nolan North as Iron Man. Who else would it be? They got Troy Baker as Bruce Banner and Laura Bailey as the Black Widow. Those three people are the best in the industry right now. But there's only so much they can do if the writing is not great. And in the story, the characters just feel so bland and uninteresting. Tony Stark only speaks in one-liners, and during the missions he just doesn't shut the fuck up. Thor is barely in the story and he doesn't really do anything, and he's by far the worst character in this game. There is nothing interesting about him. All he does is show up and say, "Oh, I'm the mighty Thor," and then he goes back to being a background character. And then Captain America shows up and he's also quite boring. He's not as bad as Thor, but he's still pretty bad. And the way Kamala and Bruce Banner recruit the rest of the Avengers feels very anticlimactic, because with the exception of Tony Stark, the other Avengers just don't show any sort of resistance to coming back. They don't show any eagerness either, they just kind of act indifferent, like, I guess I'll come back and save the world, whatever, it's not like I got a day job or anything. And there's also this one scene where they try to mimic that moment in the first Avengers movie where all the Avengers start to argue with one another, but it feels kind of forced and hollow. And then Iron Man and the Hulk have a fight off screen. Like, why are they fighting off screen? Wouldn't it be cool if this section was playable and we could pick either Iron Man or the Hulk? Like, I would want to beat up the Hulk as Iron Man. I think that would be cool. And it's not just the good guys that are bland. The villain in this game is MODOK, and his intentions are understandable, but he fails to be a menacing, threatening villain. We also have Monica Rappaccini and the organization of AIM, which stands for Advanced Idea Mechanics, and they also fail to pose that much of a threat. And that's mostly because they're just not evil enough to make the player hate them. Like, MODOK looks very cool, he looks like a giant leprechaun with face herpes, but he doesn't do enough bad shit in the story to make the player want to fight him. So when you finally do get to fight him, it feels very unsatisfying. And at the end, you're just kind of like, was that it? I feel like if they went a little deeper into the minds of each of the Avengers, if they showed a more personal side of them, if they focused on developing every single one of them one at a time and then brought them together, this would be a much better story. I mean, after all, that's exactly what the MCU did. We got movies for single characters, and once we were invested in those characters, then they brought them together. So when they finally did come together, it felt like a big deal. Now let's talk about the gameplay. The only thing you do in this game is beat up a bunch of robots. That's all you're doing. All this game has to offer is the combat. So the developers basically put all their eggs into that one basket. And if you don't find the combat to be fun, then you're gonna hate this game. So how is the combat? Well, it's hit and miss, but more miss than hit. In this game, you face a variety of different enemies with different abilities, but the variety is only on a surface level. Basically, there are enemies that you can punch, and when you hit them, they get affected by your punch. And then there's the other enemies, and with these enemies, your punches have basically no effect on them. You can just stand there and punch them, and they will eventually die. It's just that they don't react to your punches. They just stand there and take it. The combat in this game is at its best when you fight the first group of enemies that I mentioned. And it's at its worst when you're fighting the second group that I mentioned, aka the sponges. And the reason why the combat is more miss than hit is because usually there are more sponge enemies than normal enemies. So most of the time you're just trying to beat up these robots that aren't even smart enough to dodge your attacks, but they can take a lot of hits. So you're just standing there and button mashing over and over again, and it never fucking ends, and it gets old really fast. When you're fighting the normal enemies, everything is fine because you can do combos and you can juggle them in the air and try different combinations of your moves, and it's great. But you rarely get that opportunity because you have to fight giant robots that take 10 minutes of hitting square on your controller to beat. Now, the one great thing about the combat and the progression system is unlocking the different skills on the skill tree for each character. So the more you play a certain character, the more interesting they get because you keep unlocking new moves that add more depth to the combat system. But the problem is, the levels in this game are designed in a way that diminish the effect of that added depth. What I mean by that is, you unlock different skills for your character, but the combat in this game is so chaotic, there can be so many enemies fighting you at one time, that you don't really get a chance to breathe and try different tactics and explore the different skills that you've unlocked. Most of the time, you're surrounded by a shitload of enemies. They all have different attacks. Some of them are in the air. You can't tell which direction you're getting shot at, so all you're trying to do is just survive. So you find one cheap trick that can get you out of that mess and keep spamming it, because if you don't, you're gonna go down. If they gave you a little bit more room to breathe, maybe if they made different enemy types more unique and kept spawning a maximum of 3 different enemy types at a time, and maybe lower the spawn rate a little bit, it would be a lot more enjoyable to go through missions in this game. But no, you get a bunch of different enemy types all attacking you at one time. You can't tell which is which, you can't tell what's happening, and you just resort to mashing buttons, and it becomes really boring really fast. But there is another thing this game does really well. Every single character in this game feels very unique. They all have their own set of moves, they all have their own animations, and they all stand out. For example, Iron Man can fly, but when it comes to hand-to-hand combat, he doesn't last for a long time because he doesn't really have a way to heal himself. But when you play as the Hulk, he can use his rage mode to slowly heal himself. But he's slow and sluggish, and he's big, so it's easier to get hit. He's better at short-range combat, mostly because his long-range attacks are terrible, but Iron Man, on the other hand, is great at long-range attacks, and that's one of the reasons why Iron Man is my favorite, because every time it gets really chaotic and crazy, I can just fly away and use rockets or lasers to crowd control. And this is by far the best part about this game. It's the uniqueness of every character that makes you want to go back and forth between different characters just because you want to see what they're all capable of. Now, this is a live service looter beat 'em up game with microtransactions. So we already talked about the beat 'em up part, now let's discuss the looter part. In this game, you go through different missions and you collect various amounts of loot. And if you ignore the cosmetics, the only thing that you want in that loot is gear. Each piece of gear has a power level, and some of them contain little perks as well. Now, the game relies very heavily on this system being successful, but it's not, and I'll tell you why. The reason why you would want gear is to become more powerful, so that you can go through enemies a lot faster and a lot easier. The problem is the progress in becoming more and more powerful is very slow. With each mission that you do, you get gear that only makes you slightly more powerful. You gain so little power each time that you never actually feel like you're becoming more powerful. And when you do get stronger, the mission difficulty gets adjusted to match your power level. So it pretty much defeats the purpose of collecting gear. Because the only fun part about a progression system is that you work to get stronger, and when you do get stronger, the enemies that used to make your life miserable are no longer a threat. So it feels very satisfying to earn those upgrades because at the end, you can tell that it was worth it. But this game just executes this formula so poorly that the entire progression system just feels tedious and unsatisfying. The only good part about the progression system is unlocking the different skills in the skill tree, but once you're done with all that, there's really not much else for you to do. And it doesn't help that the level design is just absolutely horrendous. First of all, every single mission plays the same. You just beat people up. The game tries to trick you into thinking you're doing different things like holding out in a circle or defending a certain area, but in the end, you're still beating up a bunch of robots. There are some boss fights every now and then. There's Abomination and the Taskmaster, and they're pretty much the same. The boss fights in this game are just really terrible, and they take forever because the boss is just the giant sponge and can take punches for 30 minutes straight. And not only does every mission play the same, every mission looks the same. You're either in a gray, depressing facility or you're in the middle of the desert. Sometimes you're in the middle of the city, but it doesn't look that much better than the desert because none of the environments or the textures look visually appealing. In addition to terrible level design, this game has a lot of performance issues. Now, I understand that I'm playing this game on a regular PS4, so I always expect to have some issues, and I'm not really one to fixate that much on performance issues, but the frame rate in this game constantly drops. The audio keeps cutting in and out, there are a lot of lip syncing issues as well, and there are a lot of bugs and glitches in this game, and I wouldn't talk about them that much if I didn't have to keep restarting the game because of some of these bugs. And overall, this game is just not polished. Not to mention the overwhelming amount of incredibly long loading screens that makes me want to drink hand sanitizer. And if that wasn't enough, this game has microtransactions. And the problem with microtransactions is that whenever a game has microtransactions, the developer has to design the entire game based on that microtransaction system. The entire game has to revolve around microtransactions, otherwise there's no point. You have to hook people in and give them enough incentive to spend money in the game. People are not going to spend money in the game out of the goodness of their hearts. The items in the store have to be irresistible. And in order to trick the players into thinking the items in the store are invaluable, the alternative way to earn that item has to be much, much worse than spending real money. And the only thing that's worse than spending money is wasting your valuable time. So you're forced to pick your poison. Do you want to spend hours and hours grinding to get the item that you want, or do you want to spend $10 and get it right now? And sometimes people choose to spend the $10, and that's why the gaming industry has turned into a breeding ground for large corporations that want to milk you for whatever you're worth. Overall, Marvel's Avengers is a game with a lot of baggage. It has a lot of problems, and if you're willing to turn a blind eye and overlook those issues, it does have a few redeeming qualities. If you want to buy this game, I would recommend that you wait until it goes on sale, because as it stands right now, it's just not worth the full price. That is gonna do it for today's video. Let me know what you think of Marvel's Avengers in the comment section down below. I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.